Sorry about that. Anyway, we took pictures of Mom in the casket because Daddy was unconscious, Bill was delirious, and Bob was in the mission field. And the reason I remember those pictures so much is because a year later, when Daddy was living with us down in Newport Beach, California, just before we took him over to visit Uncle Earl when he met Elmira, he was living with us at Newport Beach, and we had a family home evening one night, and we decided to show films, slides. And among those slides were 3 or 4 of Mom in the casket. It didn't dawn on me that Dad had, sort of had a loss of memory and a loss of adult responses. He was functioning more like a 10-year-old then at the time. I remember he couldn't build. We tried to have him build a sewing machine cabinet, and the nails were showing between the boards, 1/8 of an inch, and he couldn't drive the car. He pushed the gas instead of the brake and ran the car into the back of a truck, and he couldn't respond like he used to after being unconscious for those 2 or 3 months. Anyway, we were having this family home evening, and when we showed the films, the slides of Mom in the casket, he just broke down and cried. And I said, "Well, Daddy, you knew Mom died." And he said, "No, I didn't." And I said, "But you knew she was gone." And he says, "But I kept thinking she would come back someday." Just like a child, he was waiting for his sweetheart to come back. And this was a year later, and so I remembered those pictures of Mom in the casket, and of course I do remember Jay's tears of regret that Mom didn't know he was so close to being back where she wanted. But I don't know whether it should be mentioned that in the temple they had manifestations that Mom knew that in her place on high, she knew that they had gone to the temple and had answered all of her dreams. After the funeral, it was not mentioned either, and perhaps you didn't want it mentioned, that we all got together in a family meeting at Dee's house in Bountiful to determine, there is one other thing before I tell you this. I remember the distress we all felt when Mom suddenly died. I mean, just in a day, she had a bad turn, and the doctor had said that if we knew what was good for our mother, we would pray that fat embolism that was going to strike her heart would take her and not leave her paralyzed. So we were in fasting and praying that the Lord's will would be accomplished. And then when she suddenly died and Daddy began to hum and appear to rally a tiny bit, we decided to capture that moment to take care of some legal problems. Dee, you probably remember better what transpired. I only remember that we had the farm and all these things that had to be taken care of, that we had to have some legal signatures because Daddy was way, way poorer, and we thought, well, Mom has died, we'll wait for a little while and have a double funeral because we were so certain Daddy was going to go. He was the poorer by far of the two. And so we felt like we had to get some power of attorney, or I don't know what you got, but I remember you helped Daddy when he rallied that little bit. You helped Daddy sign some legal documents. I don't suppose you ever had to use them because he did come out of his unconsciousness eventually, but I did remember that stressful situation of trying to take care of the legal part of their lives. And then after Daddy remained unconscious, we all got together and tried to decide what to do with these 6 unmarried ones. And I was involved in in the placement of Cleo and Mark. We elected that Cleo should come to our place. But when they were going to separate Cleo and Mark, mind you, she had been mothering Mark for these few years. I can't remember how old he was then, probably maybe 7. But she had mothered him these years, and because of the uniqueness of their relationship, I just could not see separating them. And I remember the family meeting went into a rather serious discussion at that time, trying to determine whether Cleo and Mark should be placed in one home, living together. And the family, when they heard all the ins and outs of Cleo's care of Mark and the relationship there, they decided that they'd be better off separated. And so Mark went with Vaughn and Sheila, and Cleo went with us. And then Beth and I had to take turns going to Tremont Hospital because Daddy was requiring 24-hour care, and the nurses were not able to give that full of care. Well, I think Beth had 9 or 11 children then, and I had, I had 6, I think, and was Relief Society or MIA president, and Keith was just a baby, and it was really difficult. Even though I had Cleo, it was difficult for Beth and me to be gone all the time. So after a couple trips down clear from Pendleton down to Tremont and to take care of Daddy for a week, Beth and I decided that we should take him out of the hospital, and we talked to the doctor, and they thought that was okay. So Kenneth and I took our station wagon that broke down. It was 9-passenger, and it broke, it laid down. And we put Daddy in the back of our station wagon, and it was a miserable ride, clear from Tremont and up to Pendleton, Oregon. I remember how miserable he was, and he was groaning in such pain all the time, that we finally had Dr. McDonald. He was the superintendent of the Mutual while I was president, and a good Latter-day Saint doctor, and had delivered Keith, and he knew the family. And so we asked Dr. McDonald to come and check my dad, and he found that things weren't right. He could smell that Daddy was just putrid inside, so they elected to I think they elected to remove part or all the cast and redo it or something. I don't know. Kenneth took care of the medical. I didn't do too hot on any medical things, and I left that mostly to Kenneth, his being a dentist. But I remember Daddy groaning in that pain, and he stayed with us for some time. I don't remember how long, but then we finally decided, I guess, to get him into some better care or into a rest home or something, because he went to Beth's at, maybe that was Marsing. I can't quite remember that either. Anyway, he stayed with Beth, and then later, after he'd been in Salt Lake again, Bountiful again for a while with Barbara and Bernie, then he came down to stay with us for a little while, and was there in Newport Beach when we decided to take him to conference, October conference, and drop him off to visit with Uncle Earl on our way home. And there's where he met Elmira, and you know the rest of the story of that. I think probably that's mostly, I used this whole tape. I might now swing away from I can't think of anything else pertaining to the plane wreck. I mentioned that Daddy made a very slow and not complete recovery. He had his same sweet spiritual nature back, but his memory of his missionary lessons, he used to cry and say, I can't remember all those scriptures and lessons that I learned. And he felt so unhappy that he couldn't do his carpentering that Kenneth went and bought him all these tools, and then he couldn't do it. He was like a little boy trying to build something. He just had lost too much of his higher mental powers. And he had such trouble with his kidneys and bowels and everything. He was just really a crippled man from then on. But because he had that sweet, loving disposition and spiritual nature, everybody around still loved him.